Captain James Mitchell had served the Royal Guard for 15 years. He stood tall and proud in his red uniform, watching over the royal family through countless ceremonies. His record was perfect. Never once had he stepped out of line or broken protocol. The other guards respected him, and the royal household trusted him completely. On the morning of Queen Camilla's coronation, James felt something strange in his chest. He had been having doubts for weeks, ever since King Charles announced that Camilla would be crowned as queen. James couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He remembered Princess Diana, how the people loved her, how she touched hearts around the world. The memory of her funeral still haunted him. As James put on his ceremonial uniform that morning, his hands trembled slightly. His wife Sarah noticed his nervousness over breakfast. She had never seen him like this before any royal event. James had always been steady as a rock, never showing emotion about his duties. But today was different. Sarah asked if he was feeling well, but James just nodded and kissed her goodbye. He couldn't tell her about the storm brewing inside his mind. The coronation ceremony was set to begin at 11 in the morning. James arrived at Westminster Abbey 2 hours early, as protocol demanded. The ancient building buzzed with activity. Hundreds of workers put finishing touches on decorations, while other guards took their positions. The world's media had gathered outside, with cameras pointing at every entrance. Millions of people would be watching this historic moment on television. James took his assigned position near the altar, where he would have a clear view of the entire ceremony. His job was simple: stand perfectly still, watch for any threats, and protect the royal family. For 15 years, he had done exactly this without question. But as guests began filling the abbey, James felt his resolve weakening. The Archbishop of Canterbury arrived first, wearing his golden robes. Then came members of Parliament, foreign dignitaries, and celebrities. Each person who entered reminded James of the weight of this moment. They were here to witness Camilla become Queen of England. The same Camilla who had been blamed for destroying Charles and Diana's marriage. The same woman many British people still refused to accept. At 10:30, the royal family began their procession into the abbey. James watched as Prince William and Kate entered, followed by other senior royals. Finally, King Charles appeared, wearing the heavy St. Edward's crown. Behind him walked Camilla, dressed in an elaborate white gown with a long train. She looked nervous, but determined. The crowd of invited guests rose to their feet as she passed. James felt his heart racing as Camilla walked past his position. She glanced at him briefly, and he saw something in her eyes that surprised him. Fear. She was scared too. For a moment, James almost felt sorry for her. But then he remembered all the pain Diana had suffered, all the tears the Princess of Wales had shed because of this woman. The ceremony began with traditional hymns and prayers. The Archbishop spoke about duty, service, and the sacred nature of the monarchy. James had heard these words many times before, but today they felt hollow. As the Archbishop placed the Queen Mother's crown on Camilla's head, James felt something snap inside him. This was wrong. The crown belonged to Diana, or to someone the people truly loved and respected. The critical moment came when the Archbishop asked if anyone present had objections to the coronation. The abbey fell completely silent. This was always a formality. Nobody ever spoke up during royal ceremonies. James felt his heart pounding so hard he thought others might hear it. His palms were sweating inside his white gloves. Every muscle in his body tensed as he fought an internal battle. For 30 seconds, the silence stretched on. James knew this was his only chance. If he stayed quiet now, Camilla would officially become queen, and there would be no going back. He thought about his oath to protect the crown, but also about his duty to the British people. He thought about Diana's sons, William and Harry, and how they must feel watching this moment. He thought about his own daughter, and what kind of monarchy he wanted her to inherit. The Archbishop was about to continue with the ceremony when James stepped forward. His movement was so sudden and unexpected, that several other guards turned to look at him. The Archbishop paused, confusion crossing his face. King Charles frowned, and Camilla's eyes went wide with alarm. The entire abbey held its breath as James opened his mouth to speak. "I object to this coronation," James declared, his voice carrying clearly through the ancient stone building. The words echoed off the walls, and a shocked gasp rose from the assembled crowd. Cameras caught every moment as James continued speaking, his voice growing stronger with each word. "This woman cannot and should not be Queen of England. She has brought nothing but scandal and division to the royal family and to our nation." The abbey erupted in chaos. Guests began talking loudly. Cameras flashed, and security guards moved toward James. But he stood his ground, his red uniform making him impossible to miss among the sea of formal dress and ceremonial robes. King Charles looked furious, his face turning red above his golden crown. Camilla appeared frozen in shock, one hand reaching toward the crown that had been placed on her head just moments before. James continued his protest, his words cutting through the noise of the crowd. "The people of Britain deserve better than this. Princess Diana was the rightful Queen of Hearts, and this coronation dishonors her memory and everything she stood for. I cannot stand by in silence while this mockery takes place." His voice carried the weight of 15 years of loyal service and the pain of watching his beloved royal family torn apart by scandal. The head of palace security finally reached James, but the damage was already done. His words had been broadcast live to millions of viewers around the world. Social media immediately exploded with reactions, photos, and videos of the unprecedented protest. Never in the history of the British monarchy had a royal guard broken protocol so dramatically during such an important ceremony. As security guards surrounded him, James felt a strange sense of peace. He had finally spoken the truth that had been burning inside him for years. He looked one last time at Camilla, who was now crying behind her veil, and at King Charles, whose coronation had been completely derailed by his outburst. The ceremony could not continue as planned, and the world watched as the British monarchy faced its most embarrassing moment in decades. The security guards escorted James out of Westminster Abbey through a side exit, away from the crowds and cameras. But the damage had already been done. Within minutes, videos of his protest were spreading across every social media platform on Earth. News channels interrupted their regular programming to report on the unprecedented disruption of Queen Camilla's coronation ceremony. In the Abbey, chaos continued to reign. The Archbishop of Canterbury stood frozen at the altar, unsure how to proceed. King Charles whispered urgently with palace officials while Camilla sat in her throne, tears streaming down her face beneath her veil. The invited guests buzzed with excited conversation, many pulling out their phones to capture the historic moment. Outside, the waiting crowds could sense something had gone terribly wrong. James found himself in a small security office within the palace complex. 3 senior officers questioned him, while lawyers and palace officials rushed in and out of the room. They wanted to know if he was working alone or part of some larger conspiracy. They asked about his mental health, his political beliefs, and whether anyone had paid him to disrupt the ceremony. James answered honestly. He had acted completely alone, driven only by his conscience and his love for the royal family. Meanwhile, the coronation ceremony struggled to continue. After a 20-minute delay, palace officials decided to proceed without addressing what had happened. The Archbishop completed the formal crowning of Queen Camilla. But the joy and celebration had been completely drained from the moment. King Charles looked angry throughout the rest of the ceremony, while Camilla appeared shaken and uncertain. The traditional cheers from the crowd outside were noticeably quieter than usual. News organizations around the world scrambled to learn more about Captain James Mitchell. Reporters discovered his spotless 15-year record with the Royal Guard, his military background, and his reputation as one of the most trusted and reliable officers in the service. Colleagues described him as the last person they would expect to break protocol. His wife Sarah was besieged by journalists outside their modest home in London, but she refused to comment on her husband's actions. Within hours, public opinion began to split dramatically. Social media exploded with two opposing hashtags: number James is a hero and number respect the Queen. Supporters praised James for having the courage to speak truth to power, calling him a patriot who stood up for Princess Diana's memory. Critics condemned him as a traitor who had disrespected the monarchy and embarrassed Britain on the world stage. Television talk shows and newspaper editorials debated whether his actions were heroic or treasonous. The royal family went into emergency crisis management mode. Palace officials worked frantically to control the narrative and minimize damage to the monarchy's reputation. They released a brief statement calling James's actions a serious breach of protocol and emphasizing that the coronation had proceeded successfully despite the disruption. However, they refused to address the substance of his protest or his claims about Queen Camilla. In his holding cell, James watched the news coverage on a small television. He felt no regret about his actions, even knowing that his career, and possibly his freedom, were now in jeopardy. He thought about Princess Diana and how she would have felt seeing Camilla crowned as queen. He remembered the promise he had made to himself years ago to always protect the honor of the royal family, even if it meant protecting them from themselves. The legal implications of James's actions were complex and unprecedented. Royal protocol experts debated whether he could be charged with treason, disrupting a religious ceremony, or simply misconduct in office. Some argued that his words, while disruptive, did not constitute an actual crime since he had not threatened anyone or incited violence. Others pointed out that interfering with a coronation ceremony was effectively an attack on the constitutional monarchy itself. Public demonstrations began forming outside Buckingham Palace by evening. Supporters of James gathered with signs reading, "Diana's Guardian Angel," and "Truth over Protocol." Counter-protesters arrived with Union Jack flags and signs supporting Queen Camilla. Police worked to keep the two groups separated as tensions rose. Similar demonstrations sprouted up in other British cities, revealing deep divisions in public opinion about the monarchy. International reaction was swift and intense. Foreign newspapers ran headlines about the Coronation crisis and the Royal Guard rebellion. Diplomatic sources revealed that several foreign dignitaries who had attended the ceremony were privately expressing embarrassment about the spectacle. The incident became a source of both fascination and concern for monarchies around the world, who worried about similar protests disrupting their own ceremonies. Behind the scenes, the royal family was struggling with how to respond. Prince William reportedly argued for showing mercy toward James, recognizing that his protest came from genuine conviction rather than malice. Prince Harry, despite his own conflicts with the family, was said to be conflicted about James's defense of his mother's memory. Queen Camilla herself remained largely silent, but sources close to her suggested she was deeply hurt by the public nature of the attack on her legitimacy. James spent his first night in custody thinking about the consequences of his actions. He knew his military pension was probably gone. His career was certainly over, and he might face serious criminal charges. His family would suffer from the scrutiny and controversy, but as he lay on the narrow bed in his cell, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: complete peace with his conscience. The morning brought a flood of support letters and legal offers. Civil rights lawyers volunteered to defend James for free, arguing that his protest was protected speech. Veterans groups released statements supporting their fellow servicemen. Most surprisingly, several former royal servants came forward anonymously to say they agreed with James's assessment of Queen Camilla's unsuitability for the throne. Television news programs featured expert panels debating every aspect of the incident. Constitutional scholars discussed the role of conscience in public service, while military experts analyzed the breakdown in chain of command that allowed the protest to happen. Psychologists offered theories about what drove a model soldier to risk everything for a moment of truth-telling. The story dominated news cycles for days, pushing other important stories to the background. The palace faced increasing pressure to respond more substantively to James's protest. Public polling showed that while a majority still supported the monarchy, a significant minority agreed with at least some of his criticisms of Queen Camilla. Younger Britons especially seemed sympathetic to his position, viewing him as someone who stood up for their beloved Princess Diana against institutional corruption and cover-ups. As the second day after the coronation dawned, it became clear that James Mitchell's 60 seconds of courage had created a crisis that would not quickly fade. The monarchy faced questions not just about Queen Camilla's legitimacy, but about its ability to command respect and loyalty from its own servants. The incident had exposed deep fractures in British society and raised fundamental questions about the future of the royal family in the 21st century. James prepared for another day of questioning, knowing that his fate would ultimately be decided not just by lawyers and judges, but by the court of public opinion. He had lit a fire that was spreading far beyond Westminster Abbey, and no one could predict where it would ultimately lead. The only certainty was that the British monarchy would never be quite the same after his moment of defiant truth-telling. 3 weeks after the coronation protest, James Mitchell sat in the office of Britain's most famous civil rights lawyer, Victoria Blackwood. She had taken his case without payment, calling it the most important free speech case in a generation. The charges against him had been reduced from treason to disrupting a public ceremony, but he still faced up to 2 years in prison. More importantly, his actions had triggered a constitutional crisis that was reshaping British politics. Public opinion polls showed stunning results. While Queen Camilla's approval ratings had plummeted to historic lows, support for James continued to grow. Street artists had painted murals of him in cities across Britain, depicting him as a lone figure standing up to corrupt power. A crowdfunding campaign for his legal defense had raised over £2 million in just 2 weeks. T-shirts bearing his image and the words, "Conscience over protocol," became bestsellers. The royal family remained largely silent about the ongoing controversy, but cracks were beginning to show. Prince William had reportedly had heated arguments with his father about how to handle the situation. Sources close to the palace revealed that William believed the family needed to address the public's concerns about Queen Camilla more directly. Prince Harry shocked everyone by releasing a statement from California, expressing understanding for James's position. Though he stopped short of endorsing the protest, James's wife Sarah had initially been angry about his decision to destroy their comfortable life for the sake of principle. But as letters of support poured in from around the world, she began to see her husband differently. Veterans wrote about their own struggles with orders they couldn't morally follow. Mothers shared stories of trying to explain to their children why Princess Diana had been treated so badly. Sarah realized that James had spoken for millions of people who felt voiceless. The investigation into James's background revealed a man of unshakable integrity. Military colleagues testified about his character, describing incidents where he had risked his career to protect fellow soldiers. His commanding officers admitted they had never seen such dedication to duty and honor in their decades of service. Even palace security officials privately acknowledged that James was one of their most trusted and reliable guards. Parliamentary debate about the incident grew increasingly heated. Opposition politicians demanded answers about why palace security had failed to prevent the protest. They questioned whether other royal guards shared James's doubts about Queen Camilla. Government ministers found themselves in the awkward position of defending both the monarchy and the right to free speech. Some called for reforms to make the royal family more accountable to public opinion. International media attention intensified when several European newspapers published editorials supporting James's position. A French journalist wrote that he had reminded the world that monarchy must earn legitimacy, not simply inherit it. German commentators praised his courage to speak truth in a society that often values politeness over honesty. American talk show hosts compared him to historical figures who had stood up to unjust authority. The Church of England found itself caught in an impossible position. The Archbishop, who had crowned Queen Camilla, faced criticism for proceeding with the ceremony after James's protest. Religious leaders debated whether the coronation was spiritually valid given the dramatic objection that had been raised. Some argued that God had spoken through James to express divine displeasure with the proceedings. Queen Camilla's public appearances became increasingly uncomfortable spectacles. Protesters followed her wherever she went, holding signs with Princess Diana's image and chanting, "Not our Queen." Security had to be dramatically increased for all royal events. The stress was clearly taking its toll on her health and appearance. Palace sources leaked concerns about her mental state and ability to fulfill her royal duties under such intense scrutiny. The trial date was set for 6 months after the coronation, giving both sides time to prepare their cases. James's legal team planned to argue that his protest was protected political speech and that his conscience as a public servant required him to speak out against what he saw as an injustice. The prosecution would argue that his duty as a royal guard superseded any personal political opinions, and that disrupting the coronation was an attack on democratic institutions. Behind the scenes, James received an unexpected visitor in prison. Prince William arrived secretly one evening, without security or official notice. The two men talked for over an hour about duty, honor, and the future of the monarchy. William reportedly thanked James for his service and acknowledged that his mother would have appreciated having such a loyal defender. The prince's visit remained secret for weeks until a sympathetic guard leaked the story to the press. Support for James spread beyond Britain's borders. Princess Diana fan clubs around the world organized rallies in his honor. A statue of him was erected in Paris, near the tunnel where Diana died, bearing the inscription, "He spoke when others stayed silent." American celebrities began wearing James Mitchell pins to award shows and public events. The incident had transformed him from an unknown soldier into a global symbol of standing up for what's right. The royal family's approval ratings continued to decline as the controversy dragged on. Younger Britons especially seemed to be losing faith in the monarchy altogether. Republican groups experienced surges in membership as people questioned whether an institution that could inspire such passionate opposition from its own guardians was worth preserving. The palace struggled to maintain relevance in a rapidly changing world. James used his time in prison to write a book about his experiences serving the royal family. Publishers competed fiercely for the rights, knowing it would become an international bestseller. He wrote movingly about Princess Diana's kindness to the staff, the royal family's private struggles, and his growing conviction that the monarchy needed fundamental reform to survive. The book would later become required reading in politics classes at several universities. On the day of his trial, thousands of supporters gathered outside the courthouse. Police estimated the crowd at over 50,000 people, making it one of the largest political demonstrations in London in decades. They carried banners reading, "Justice for James," and "Truth is not treason." Counter-protesters were vastly outnumbered, but equally passionate in their defense of royal tradition and protocol. The trial lasted 3 weeks and featured testimony from historians, constitutional experts, and character witnesses. James himself took the stand for 2 full days, calmly explaining his motivations and refusing to express any regret for his actions. When asked if he would do it again knowing the consequences, he replied without hesitation, "My conscience is worth more than my comfort. I would speak those words again tomorrow. I pentasted, my conscience." The jury deliberated for 4 days before reaching their verdict. James Mitchell was found guilty of disrupting a public ceremony, but was given a suspended sentence and community service rather than prison time. The judge acknowledged that his actions, while technically illegal, came from genuine conviction and noble motives. The courtroom erupted in cheers when the sentence was announced, and celebrations continued in the streets for hours. The verdict represented a compromise that satisfied no one completely but reflected the complex nature of the case. James was technically a criminal, but had avoided serious punishment. The monarchy had been vindicated in court but damaged in public opinion. Queen Camilla remained on the throne, but with severely diminished authority and respect. The incident had revealed deep fractures in British society that would take years to heal. In the months following the trial, James Mitchell became a sought-after speaker and commentator on issues of conscience and public service. He established a foundation to support whistleblowers and others who risked their careers to expose wrongdoing. His courage had inspired countless others to speak truth to power in their own lives and circumstances. The royal guard who broke protocol at a coronation had accidentally started a revolution in how people thought about duty, loyalty, and the courage to do what's right.